Hi, it's Bright Candle from Charlie Foxtrot Operations. With Tanoa being released onto the dev branch, we can get a preview of what the performance is like. To get the formalities out of the way real quick, this is a 6700K running with two 970 graphics cards, and it's not overclocked. All the settings are running on very high with no modifications. This is actually the third time I've done these performance tests. The dev branch has kept changing and the performance characteristics have changed quite dramatically as well. Performance on Tanoa and on Altis have both gone up. We've seen at least a 20 FPS gain across the two, which is really quite promising and puts the Altis performance more in line with what we see on the stable branch. On the left you can see Altis, and on the right you can see Tanoa. We're doing a 360-degree turn to look at the FPS in all of the different directions. This first scenario is a vantage point over a major town. We are looking at 6 different scenarios in total, which all have quite widely different performance characteristics. This second scenario is in the centre of the two largest towns on both terrains. This third scenario is on very open ground in the middle of the two largest airfields. We're looking at the heaviest forest scenario we could find on the two terrains, and it's immediately apparent just how dense Tanoa's forests are compared to Altis. The visibility range is vastly shorter, and also the amount of just general foliage in the area is significantly less, and performance is not surprisingly quite different as well. We're looking at military compounds on the top of hills in this scenario, and the performance differences between the two are highly representative of the really significant difference in the amount of terrain objects in the area. This is a scenario where it's still a sizable forest, but the amount of foliage is significantly reduced compared to the heaviest forest scenario. This is a more sort of average-like forest scenario across the two. First, we're going to look at the low FPSs we saw in each of the 6 scenarios. For the most part, even at 1440p, we're managing to get over 60 frames a second, except when we go into the towns and the forest inside of Tanoa. The high FPS shows a similar story, with Altis mostly winning, and we see that the compound scenario has now changed from where Tanoa was vastly better in the low FPSs, and now it's slightly losing on the high FPS range. So when we distill all this down and we just look at the FPSs for the lows and the highs across all these different scenarios, what actually happens? Well, Tanoa in quite a lot of scenarios is up to about 28% slower than Altis. And notably that forest scenario, which quite likely many people were concerned about, is indeed significantly slower than in Altis due to the amount of trees and foliage that's actually there. What's quite interesting, however, is that the open ground, the towns, and even the light forest show quite significant reductions as well. And while the compound shows that Tanoa can perform vastly better, we're also seeing that there's almost nothing in that compound. There's a lot less objects and such inside of that particular scenario. And the overlook is over quite a smaller town. Tanoa doesn't have the same sort of size of town, and even if it did, you can't get an overlook of it due to the fact it's surrounded by trees on all the hills. The last thing to look at is the GPU usage across all these scenarios, and what's quite notable is the fact that in almost all cases it's above 50%, so SLI is scaling pretty well, and this is likely performing better than a 980 Ti would. If we look at it, however, we can see that GPU usage is still regularly below 100%, which means in a lot of these cases we're still CPU limited, and so that 6800K processor is what's really driving the performance here. In multiplayer, we're obviously going to see frame rates much below this, and you're almost always CPU limited in that case. But there is a clear distinction. Forests are quite clearly GPU limited, they max out the GPU usage, and a faster GPU would absolutely improve performance in that scenario. But inside of the towns, it's heavily CPU dependent. There's still time, thankfully, for Bohemia to work on the performance on this map. However, it's not like performance is currently dreadful, it's mostly hitting above the 60 FPS range. But the concern is that once this goes into multiplayer, people are going to have more performance problems on Tanoa than they do on Altis. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this preview into Tanoa performance comparing it to Altis.